On the podcast today, I'm speaking to one of the best voices in football today. He's played an integral part in some of the finest narratives in football coming through to our television screens and putting it into words, especially this season. I'm delighted to be joined by commentator Adam Summerton. Adam, as I was saying, mate, I know around this time of the season with cup finals and whatnot, it can get rather hectic. So I'm really delighted that you're joining me today. Thanks for taking the time to have a chat with us. How are things?
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for the invite. Yeah, it's really good. You're right to say it has been really busy of late. It's just starting to calm down a little bit now. So I've gone from sort of 3 or 4 games a week to 1 at the minute. So it's been quite nice because I can kind of take my time a little bit more over the prep, which is always nice. So I'm trying to think. So I've got a game coming up on Sunday, Napoli, Sampdoria. Then I've got the Europa Conference League final. And that's the end of my club season. And I've got a couple of internationals, and then that's it for the summer. But yeah, it's been a long season, but always very enjoyable.
Yeah, of course. And as you say there, some of the narratives to come across, to come out of football this season, at all levels, some special scripts have been written. I mean, whether it be, as you mentioned, Napoli, Luciano Spalletti winning Napoli's first Scudetto in over 33 years, which it looks as if he's going to take a sabbatical now, which is going to be interesting. And going down to the National League, that battle between Wrexham and Notts County, both pushing each other to over 100 points before both ultimately being promoted. The Bundesliga being decided on the last day, the World Cup being sandwiched in between it all. It has been an exceptional season. So as far as the narratives to come out of this season, what's been your pick of the bunch?
Well, I cover a lot of leagues at a lot of different levels, but I think this season in particular, the National League has really excelled itself.
Yep.
The title race that you've already alluded to there. I always think it's interesting that when you were talking about that, I was smiling and you were smiling, and that's what that season will always bring a smile to my face, thinking about the season that we've just had in the National League. I think it's my 8th year covering the league at BT. And we always have great stories and great narratives every year. They can change in the type of stories you get. But this one in particular, with the fact that we had these 2 exceptional teams that were just pushing each other harder and harder, they just were relentless, wasn't it? And it was all the stories around that, obviously, with the Hollywood interest in Wrexham was a big factor too, that generated maybe levels of interest, or helped to generate levels of interest in that standard of football that we've simply never seen before. And that's been reflected, I think, in the numbers that we've had for the coverage on BT. It's just been so exciting now. I mean, even if you just strip that back and just look at the football and the excitement of the games that we had, particularly at the back end of the season, so exciting to watch. Absolutely gripping TV, and the way that it all culminated as well with the redemption story at Wembley, with Kedwin Scott scoring the penalty that sent Notts County up, having had his penalty saved by Ben Foster. I mean, you just wouldn't dare to even script these things, really. It was just so fanciful for me to even predict that something like that might happen. So the National League this season, is the interest that it's had. As I say, I mean, it is unprecedented, and it's been fantastic to cover. But I enjoy all the leagues that I cover. I mean, you're right to point out Napoli as well. What they've done this season has been phenomenal. And when you do look at it in the round, and as you've pointed out with the Bundesliga as well, it has been, hasn't it? Really has been an exceptional season overall. So exciting.
Yeah. Just on that note of the National League, having watched the playoff final between Chesterfield and Notts County, what was going through your head when John Bostock dinked that penalty?
Exactly what I said, really, which was just, what was he thinking? Sometimes with games like that, as a commentator, in terms of what's going through your head in different times, it can change quite a lot. But there are some games where you almost can just be washed away with it, and that was one of them, really, where you just allow yourself to just be totally immersed in what's happening, and almost just react like a fan or a neutral watching the game might react, really, which is what I did when he did what he did. I think I actually said, what was he thinking? So yeah, but he has, of course, pointed out since that that's how he takes penalties. He did it in Belgium quite a bit, but whether I would have still done that to go up into the Football League, I'm still not sure about that. I think it shows an astonishing level of self-confidence for which perhaps he deserves praise. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was what was going through my head. I just thought, what on earth is he doing? You know, because I live in Nottingham, so I know quite a few Notts County fans, and I know how anxious they'd been for a very long time. So for somebody to be that cool and try something that audacious in those circumstances kind of blew your mind a little bit. But well, they got the job done in the end.
Yeah, they most certainly did. And I think that penalty just epitomised, as we were saying, just how intense and crazy this season has been. Before talking about your career path and how you've got to where you are today, I've made note of a few quick fire questions, if you will, that I'm intrigued to hear your take on, given your career in the game. And one outside of football as well, because I always feel like that's important. So, firstly, I would be interested to hear about what is the best individual goal that you've ever seen scored live.
Oh wow! Best individual goal seen live. I was at the Manchester derby where Rooney scored that overhead kick. That was quite that was a fantastic goal. I always struggle when people ask me questions like this because there's just so many, really. I mean, even this season, the Pedro Gonçalves goal of Sporting at Arsenal. Yeah, that very, I mean, a totally different goal, but that was an excellent goal. Oh, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. That is a tough one. Sorry, I know this isn't great when I'm
No, don't worry about
for
it.
a podcast when somebody's falls in like this.
It makes you go through the catalogue of goals that you have seen scored live, and
Yeah, I mean, there's just been so many.
Yeah, they all have. They're all good for different reasons, if you know what I mean.
Exactly that. I mean, do you look at a team goal? Because I'm always a great admirer of when you see a goal with so many different passes, perhaps, and you know, it ultimately ends up might be a tap-in, but the fact that it's led such a good move to get to that point. Ask me the next one. I'll see if anything else springs to mind. But there's just so many that I could say that I'm not even sure that I could give you just one, to be honest.
The best individual performance that you've seen live.
Best individual performance. And that is very, very tough. I think, you know, I'd have to be looking at maybe some. I mean, we've all seen Steven Gerrard performances when he is. I can remember him just grabbing games by the scruff of the neck and almost single-handedly getting Liverpool over the line. I mean, I suppose you could argue one of the best examples of that was the 2005 Champions League final, where the guy ended up playing right back in the end, I think, and having scored the goal that got Liverpool back into it. That was a phenomenal, I felt, individual performance.
Yeah, he carried Liverpool on his back at times during that mid-2000s period, didn't he?
Yeah, and I saw him on many occasions do that. Trying to think of other individual performances. I think it would. I can't give you another example off the top of my head but other than the one I've just given you. But for me, I'd have to look at Gerrard, because I think he was just at that time in that particular Liverpool side. If you took him out of that team, the effect that would have had in terms of how often he raised the bar for them, how often he drove them on. I've rarely seen a player contribute more to a team's success on an individual basis than I did with Gerrard in that sort of Liverpool generation of that time. I mean, if you look at sort of great Manchester United sides of the last 20 years, you're looking at more of a collective effort. It was rare that they would be so reliant, except on Ronaldo on his return. But I don't think you have to even really look at that, because it wasn't during a successful period for them. But during their most successful era, it was always a collective, wasn't it? One of their great strengths, perhaps why they always were better than Liverpool really in that time, because it was a collective effort rather than relying maybe on one supremely talented individual. So Yeah, I would go with Gerrard
That's a
for
fair
that.
assessment. I would say so. Um, if you could sit and talk football with somebody for an hour that you haven't already spoken to or interviewed, who would it be and why?
Well, the player that I've always most, again, to go back to Liverpool, actually, because we come from a similar area. You're from Liverpool. I'm from a little bit further down the coast in Southport, but so I grew up around, that Merseyside scene of football with Liverpool and Everton and Tranmere. I covered Tranmere for Radio City in Liverpool. And somebody who's managed them and played for Liverpool, and someone I always, because I was a left winger when I was a kid. So John Barnes was the player who I just admired him so much as a footballer. Just his skill set was incredible to me. And he was just everything that I wanted to be. And I've never actually met him. Funnily enough, someone asked me about this the other day, asked me a similar kind of question. And I said, I've met so many people doing this job, ex-footballers, ex-managers, current players. But I don't know quite how, because he's worked quite a bit in the media, but I've still never met John Barnes. I think I don't tend to get starstruck really, because it's just, it's normal to meet these people. But I think I might do if I ever met John Barnes, because I literally pretended to be him in the playground when I was a kid in the 90s. So I would love to sit down and talk football with John. But I could give you loads and loads of names again, because I'm a big fan of Italian football, and just recently I got a chance to just sit down and talk about Italian football with Gianfranco Zola, which was just I don't know. At the time, I was thinking, as he's talking, I'm thinking, I'm talking to Gianfranco Zola about Italian football. This is amazing. So there's loads of people I would like to sit down and have a conversation about that. Someone like, I don't know, maybe Battistuta or Maldini, great players of that generation, where we all, from my generation, who grew up on Football Italia. So that they would be other people. But if I had to pick one, it would be John Barnes.
Yeah, Maldini's probably a good shout for me. We spoke a little bit off camera about our sort of background and stuff, and my granddad was a defender. Always sort of brought me up to be a defensive-minded player. Who better to speak to?
Yeah.
Paolo Maldini, and we seen that in CBS's coverage of the Milan semi-final of Micah Richards and Jamie Carragher and Thierry Henry just being so complimentary about Maldini.
It was funny, because when Tomori signed for Milan, before he signed from him, he said that because of course Maldini is part of the hierarchy, for people who don't know now, at Milan, and one of his key responsibilities is recruitment. And Tomori said that before he signed, he had a Zoom call with Maldini. And he said, I wasn't really listening to what he was saying, because all I could think about was, I'm speaking to Maldini here on a Zoom call, and how surreal it was. But, it's great for the Milan players, and they've referenced, I think Tomori said this himself as well, that, quite regularly Maldini will just pop his head round the corner at training and be there and giving them advice. And that must be fantastic for those Milan players to have access to somebody of his knowledge and experience. Must be absolutely wonderful.
Certainly. And just want a little bit out of left field, but it's also an interest of mine, so I feel like I should ask it. What's your favorite film?
Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. That's an easy one.
Only Guy Ritchie, isn't it?
Yeah, I know a lot of people might sniff at that and think that's when all the choice out there. But if I have to pick a movie that consistently I've watched several times and I still enjoy it, it makes me laugh every single time. It's got a brilliant soundtrack as well. It was just, I think I must have been in my late teens. I think late 90s. I think that came out, and it was a great time in my life as well. So yeah, that's I know there's probably a lot more highbrow movies out there, but that is a movie that I always enjoy watching.
Oh, you can't go wrong with Guy Ritchie. I watched Snatch the other day, and again, it's up there, isn't it? I think in terms of the craft of being a film director, I think he's certainly up there with the best. But just to move it on, just sticking to that sort of career path and development. I'd be really interested to hear. Obviously, you said you grew up in that Merseyside bubble of football, which, whenever talking to somebody within sports or within the industry from this neck of the woods, it is something that you just can't get away with. I know you've been very complimentary of John Barnes there, but was there a certain player or game that you went to as a kid that ignited your desire to pursue a career in football?
Um, I wouldn't say that there was a particular game. No, I just think it was something that I was brought up around. My mum's side of the family are all Manchester United supporters. I had a mixture of Liverpool and Everton fans. So I was kind of immersed in the Northwest football scene. I remember, my dad would have the Saturday afternoon Radio City Sports program on while he was painting or decorating or gardening or whatever every Saturday. So I grew up listening to, to people like Graham Beecroft. I remember doing the commentary. There were so many others as well because Radio City was such a good breeding ground. I think you had Clive Tilsley on there. There's been so many people who've gone through Radio City. Kevin Keatings was another one that I remember listening to on there. So it always has and always will be probably what you. I mean, it's a cliche, but a hotbed of of football. And then I ended up playing in the area. Played in the Southport leagues. I played in Liverpool leagues. I played on Buckley Hill, which people who are from the Liverpool area will know exactly where I mean by there. I suppose it's the Liverpool equivalent of Hackney Marshes, really, for anyone who's maybe from down south. So I played in those kind of environments. I as a kid, I had about, I can't remember exactly how long, but it was 6 to 12 months as a trainee at Preston North End as well. So again, across the Northwest. So yeah, I just loved football, and there was no one particular game. No, I mean, I went to lots of games, but no one particular game. I still try and pop in at Southport whenever I can as well to watch the mighty Sandgrounders. It'd be nice to see them get promoted again. But yeah, it's just a great place to grow up if that's your sport, really, because people are just discussing it, talking about it all the time, and there's so much going on in terms of the youth setup as well in that area. There's so many opportunities there for young players to get involved, and I'm sure it's still the same now. In fact, it's probably much more so than it was even when I was a kid.
Yeah, as bizarre as it is to say, I've always said it's almost akin to religion down here, just how it is.
Yeah, it is in a way. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's just something that brings people together. And I know that you could probably say that in lots of parts of the country, but it's just one of the. I mean, I suppose again, it's not exclusive to people from the Northwest, but if I ever meet someone new, the first thing I'll try and talk to them about is football. So I know if they're into football, I know that we'll not be short of anything to talk about. Even if I don't even know them. So I don't live there now, but it's a lovely place to grow up. I was there just a couple of days ago. Actually, I went back to Southport. So a great place to grow up, and it was as I was a kid, just non-stop football, really.
Yeah. Nice to hear. And there may not have been a game or a particular player, but once you sort of envisioned a career path within the sports media industry before moving into broadcasting, were there any television broadcasts, the sports programs, or broadcasters that sort of shaped or molded your style?
Yeah, I mean, I can always remember as a kid, my dad collected quite a lot of stuff, like CDs and videos, and he was somebody who bought quite a lot, like season review type videos. And very often I would sit there and I would have them sort of stacked up, and I'd watch loads of different videos. And at the time, the commentators were people like Brian Moore, John Motson, Barry Davis, and they were the type of sort of voices that perhaps I grew up with at that particular time. And I never sat down and thought, oh, I want to be a commentator and so I want to soak up how these guys do it. But I think subconsciously, I actually probably did. I don't think even as like a 10, 11, 12-year-old, that was even in my thoughts. But I think back even now when I reflect on certain things that I might have said in a commentary, and I think what I said sounded a little bit like the words that might have been put together by those guys. And I wonder how much subconsciously I did actually take in from watching those guys at the time. There's never been anybody who I've sat down and thought, I want to be like them. I've never done that, but there have been guys people who I've certainly admired and taken the best bits from and said, well, I like the way that they do that. I'm not so sure I quite like that, the way they've done that, but I think the way they do that is brilliant. And I think that's the case with any broadcaster, really. I don't think anyone, well, I can't speak for anyone else, but I'd be surprised if anyone seeks to simply imitate somebody else. That part of being a good broadcaster is individuality and being able to express yourself. And I think a lot of being a good broadcaster comes from your love of your subject and your interest in your subject. And I think that is a very personal thing. So it's very hard to just replicate or duplicate something somebody else has done, but you can undoubtedly take inspiration from other people. And I've certainly done that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well said. And I think that analytical aspect of it is a key part to what helps you with that individuality. You pick and choose aspects that you like and mold it in your own way. I mean, I saw recently on your Twitter page a video where you gave a brief insight into the sheer volume of research and data collection that you do ahead of covering a game. To me, it demonstrated that level of commitment and hard work that's consistently needed in order to be a top commentator. So I'd be interested to hear about, as far as the journey to getting where you are today, at what point did, not necessarily stumble across, but at what point did you find methods or a way that works for you?
So in terms of specifically the prep you're talking about,
Particularly, yeah.
yeah, in terms of the prep, that is a very sort of organic process, really, that went on over a number of years, from when I was sort of climbing the ladder from a very, very low level of covering, non-league football. I wouldn't even be able to tell you what level it was. Probably 6th or 7th tier, something like that. I remember being at Prescott Cables covering there, and yeah, that was many years ago, and clubs like that, and Hucknall Town round in Nottingham. And I think that you very gradually over the years, you sort of develop methods that suit you best. And it's really interesting with commentators, because obviously I know a lot of other commentators, and sometimes you'll see their prep, or they'll show you how they do things, or they'll put it on the internet like I have. And nobody really does it the same way. They all do things differently. And I think the basics for me of good commentary come from the prep. It's absolutely essential, really. I call them labors of love. They are very time consuming. And sometimes you have to search quite hard for the little bits of gems that will tell people something they don't already know, which I think is an important part of a good commentary. I'm not a commentator, or I'm not somebody who believes that a commentator should purely just say what is in front of them. I know that some people like that. They would prefer a commentator who gives you very little color at all, and all they want you to do is just say what you see. For me, that is not, I don't believe that is good commentary. I think there has to be some color, some information within the commentary. There's a very subtle balance as to how much, because you can do too much, you can talk too much. Sometimes silence is your friend. But I do think that a good commentary has to inform people, has to, like I say, tell some people something they don't already know. So I've always worked on the principle that that hard work and research breeds confidence, and then the confidence breeds authority on air, which is a really important thing. The audience have got to believe in you, and they've got to believe in what you're telling them, especially when you're covering maybe more niche products, like, for example, say Serie A, where if you're covering that in the UK, the likelihood is a large proportion of your audience are going to know the league inside out, and they'll quickly see through you if you don't. So you've got to be on top of your brief. So everybody does things in slightly different ways. Maybe they'll find their information in different areas. Maybe they'll lay it out in different ways. But I think ultimately you've got to have those core principles, really, in terms of prep. It's absolutely essential for, in my opinion, a good commentary.
Yes, sir. Well said. And in terms of those core principles, were there any pivotal moments or mentor figures along your career path that bestowed any sort of pearls of wisdom on you that you've stuck by?
Yeah, I mean, the guy who got me into commentating in the first place, because it wasn't really something I ever thought I would be any good at. I always wanted to perhaps be involved in reporting on football in some way. Initially, I wanted to be a print journalist. And then I thought, when I went on the broadcast side of things, I thought I would maybe be someone who perhaps just reported from games or interviewed people at games or something like that. But a guy called Tony Delahunty, who was my first proper boss really in radio, was a former commentator, and he kind of nudged me into it really and just said, look, we've got the rights to cover Mansfield Town at the little radio station I was working for then. Great little radio station that really punches above its weight in Mansfield. And they had the rights for the Stags, and he just said, right, I want you to do it. And I just it was like sink or swim really. So he was somebody who I took a lot from. There was a guy who I worked with initially there who was also a commentator there called Nigel Pinnock, who helped me with the mechanics of commentary to begin with, a little bit of an early mentor for me. Another guy there called Steve Hartshorn, who sadly is no longer with us now, who again was somebody who helped me a lot in the early stages. And there's just so many points during, if I can call it like a journey really, from a really low level in even amateur radio, then local radio, and then regional radio, national radio, club TV, national TV. It's such a gradual process over, from my first commentary, that would have been 2003. And then I started at BT in 2013. So that's 10 years just, so you can see how many sort of little checkpoints you would have had along that journey where you're introduced to people who help you along the way. I think standards of prep are something that you become more and more aware of what's required the further that you go. And I think when I first started covering European football for the World Feed, that would have been sort of around about sort of 2007, 8, 9, that kind of time. That showed me a whole new level perhaps of the depth that you need to go into when you're covering European teams, and how there has to be a high standard in terms of learning how to say people's names. That was a key sort of checkpoint for me in my development as a commentator. Was it isn't good enough to just, have a stab at it. It isn't good enough to just think, you need to go out there and find out, and you need to do the legwork with things like researching how to say people's names for respect of that individual person as much as anything else. And again, for your integrity as a commentator, those things you need to put the effort in. You'll always get situations where someone will criticize your pronunciation because they'll say, oh no, a classic example to make it current is Kevin De Bruyne. It's always a difficult one for commentators because it's so ingrained that it's Kevin De Bruyne, which is the incorrect pronunciation of it. So you'll be criticized if you say De Bruyne. People will say, who's this guy? What's he going on about? What's he saying De Bruyne for? And you'll be criticized by some people if you say De Bruyne, because they'll say he's not done his research. He doesn't know how to say his name properly. So sometimes you can't win whichever way you go. But there are other times when it's either right or it's wrong. And I think that's a really important aspect, particularly when you're covering European football. And I suppose these days, there's, for a long time now, there's been a lot of European footballers within the domestic game as well. So it's important in that respect too.
Certainly. And I mean, you alluded to it there, and I understand that at 24, I'm at the beginning stages of that journey, but I do have full wisdom that you're in it for the long haul. I understand that it certainly is a long journey, and given the rate of technological development, in the current day and age, who knows how much it'll change. You've seen the increase of broadcasting monies come post 92 from Sky, and what that's done to English football. And I'd be interested to hear, especially as you mentioned, somebody who envisaged being a print journalist who's ultimately gone through radio and now is in television broadcasting, which is also a big interest of mine. People credit local radio immensely as to get into the industry as a stomping ground and to really find your feet. and develop what direction that you're going to go into. So I'd be interested to hear, in what ways did that prepare you for broadcasting as you do now in television?
Well, radio was utterly essential for me in terms of how I learnt my trade, really, to put it like that. It is an incredibly, and has been for a long time, been an amazing breeding ground. I mean, if you were to sort of compile a list of maybe all commentators who are working on national TV now who are aged between 40 and 70, you'd find almost all of them would have had a big grounding in local radio. It's where you, I suppose, in some ways, maybe you made mistakes, but also where you were just able to develop and learn your craft, and learn not just about commentary, but other aspects of broadcasting. Because I think sometimes you can think that if you're listening to a commentator doing a TV commentary, that that's all that they've ever done. But as I say, that's very rare. As a commentator, I can't stress enough how commentary isn't really a skill that you could just teach someone. You could teach someone the mechanics of it, but commentary is a skill that incorporates lots of other skills. So, for example, when you're working in local radio, you'd be expected to go and interview people. You might be expected to work in the newsroom as well, where you develop a nose for a story, where you learn narratives, where you learn where a story's heading. And commentary, good commentary sometimes is about homing in on a narrative or a storyline. To give you an up-to-date example, the situation with Kedwin Scott and Notts County in the playoff final, where it was that tale of redemption, where he'd had his penalty saved by Ben Foster, then he's the last person up to take the penalty to send Notts. It was an obvious narrative, but it's still a narrative that you have to pick up upon and make the most of. And a lot of that comes from having a background of working. I worked on news desks for years. My background is as a radio news journalist. So that is really important, that you're able to multitask and bring in skills that you've learned from other aspects and other sides of broadcasting, which you get within radio, because there's never usually a lot of money around in radio. So you're expected to do lots of things. You can't go into a particular local radio station and say, well, I'm a commentator and I won't be doing anything else other than commentary. It doesn't work like that. You have to be versatile. And I would always advise any young broadcaster to be versatile, be able to turn your hand to lots of different things, be that outside broadcast, presenting, interviewing people. These days, even, working on the social media side of things too. Be good in front of camera, behind the camera, maybe even film, absolutely everything. Be as versatile as you can, really, because all of the skills, if you want to ultimately be a commentator, they are transferable. So radio is these days, I don't think it's the be all and end all, though, radio, largely because it's just not the same landscape as it was when I was coming through in my 20s. These days, there's very few, sadly, I think very sadly, very few local radio stations who will provide full match commentary on their team's coverage. I think that's a backward step for many different reasons. I hope one day it'll come full circle and that localness will come back again. But having said that, there are other opportunities now for young broadcasters, such as YouTube. You don't need that chance from somebody in a radio station, as I did back then. I needed someone to open a door for me. These days, you can go and do it yourself. You can set up your own channel. So there's club TV channels, which weren't as common when I was first starting out and are certainly very common now. There's club radio stations that weren't as common when I was starting out that are more common now. So the landscape has changed. There isn't the same opportunities in local radio that there was, but I still think there are those opportunities to develop as a broadcaster. You just got to go and find them, really.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and on your commenting of the value of local radio, I can only echo that from my experience at Radio Merseyside. A fantastic place to develop your understanding of how things work, and you're very right in saying that you can't just be a one-trick pony. You need to be a jack of all trades in terms of developing that journalistic nous of picking up on stories and being, just saying yes to everything. I think is just ultimately the key thing to do, especially in an environment such as local radio. Um, As far as your commentary style, if you'll allow me, I think you've got an excellent voice for it, which straight put simply, you're very clear and concise. You know how to add to a significance of a moment by providing the right context, which I think is a key aspect of your commentary. As you said, there are some very say what you see type broadcasters, whereas I have always lent towards those that contextualize a moment with a story and add to the drama of the moment. Because I've always said that I feel like sport, football in particular, is unscripted drama in its purest form, and why I think people enjoy it so much. And as you rightly say, you also know when to let the mic breathe and when to let atmosphere take control of a situation. Um, my point being ultimately that you do very much seem like a natural at what you do. I'd be interested to hear about that experience of finding your voice, and also just in terms of the challenges of that, if you ever experienced anything like imposter syndrome at any point.
I think I'd boil down the way that I try and commentate is that I just try as much as I can to live it in the way that fan would, or in the way that, and when I say a fan, I don't necessarily mean of either of the teams involved, but just as a football fan. I think if you're you can be as genuine as possible as a broadcaster. I think that is. I think to have that authenticity that people can relate to is really important as a broadcaster. There's always the temptation to try and be as absolutely polished as possible, but I think sometimes people want that little bit of rawness to hear that the person who's talking over it, or has the privilege of talking over it, is as kind of immersed in the moment as you are. And I try and do that as much as I possibly can. Really, there are times where you do have to be very aware of the mechanics and of being a commentator, and there's certain things, certain maybe rules that you have to, unwritten rules that perhaps you have to abide by. But I think there is very much a place to be washed away with it. There's so many different facets of, as I say, of good commentary. I think there has to be that element to it, and I think there also has to be that element of wanting to, as I said earlier, to rewind a little bit, telling people things that they don't already know. I think that's a really important thing. But ultimately, what it all boils down to is a genuine energy and enthusiasm for the game of football, really. Mm-hmm. And that is when I take all what I think makes a good commentary, it all relates back to, well, how much do you love the game? How much does it excite you? I mean, I could be sat here on my own, as I often am, researching about a game, and I'll get all excited because I find something out about a player that I didn't know, and I think I can't wait to sort of say that in a. Sometimes I'll be that excited to get this little bit of information across that I'll tweet it out, and I think, why have you tweeted that out? You should have just saved it for your commentary, But I think you have to have that. You have to have that sort of boundless enthusiasm for the game and for broadcasting. Really, that's how I try and be. Ultimately, I could talk forever about what I think makes good commentary, because it's what occupies my thoughts a lot, to be honest, and it's what I do for a living. I'm very passionate about it. But I think if you do boil it down, it is as simple as that. Really, it's having that passion, that energy, that enthusiasm for the game of football, and I think if you're doing it right, it really comes through on air. And I think a lot of people can hopefully can relate to that. And if people can see that you're feeling and enjoying the game as much as they are, again, I think that makes for good TV or good radio.
Spot on. I would say so, and I definitely think that is the case with you. I picked up on what you said a little bit earlier in terms of your path. Did you mention working in club television?
Yeah, I'd worked for a company for a number of years on and off. At the time, I was working 7 days a week, really, because I was working in newsrooms, just doing as a newsreader and a radio reporter during the week. And then at weekends, I would work for a company up in the Northwest in Preston, they had contracts for club TV channels. So I worked on Everton's club TV channel. I worked on Wigan's. Was it Wigan's? Yeah, I think it was. I also worked on radio commentary for Wigan. I'm trying to remember, it's a long time ago now. I definitely worked on Aston Villa's and I worked on Portsmouth's. So that was a really good grounding for me, because those TV commentaries, they weren't real. They were sort of packaged up and they were sold by the clubs abroad, I think mainly. They went on the club's own websites and they were sold abroad to TV companies abroad, but they never went out on UK television, well, not to my knowledge anyway. So whilst you had to obviously be working to a good standard and you would absolutely always do your best, I think there was an acceptance of the level that you were at as a commentator, that, you know, you weren't a top level commentator, because otherwise you would be working on, UK TV at the time. So I wouldn't say that it was where you made your mistakes, but you were certainly able to develop as a commentator, to learn the mechanics of it, more than you can't be doing that at the highest level. You know, the time's gone then to be learning. Really, you've got to be at it by that point. But they were really, really important for me in terms of learning the ropes as a TV commentator, because before that I'd only done radio commentary, and they're two very different disciplines. There are some carryovers, but they are very different disciplines. And sometimes I almost exclusively now do TV, but there was a time when I would be switching quite regularly from radio to TV each week, and you had to approach it in your mind very differently, because you can't go on TV and commentate as you would on the radio. It just wouldn't sound right. So.
I understand where you're coming from with that. Definitely. Was there much, if all, of your career spent presenting or anything in front of camera?
Not really, no. I mean, that is something that, if I look at all the different types of experience that I've had, that's probably an area where I've had the least experience. I have done it. I have presented, both on radio and TV, but not very often. I don't mind doing it. It's not really something that you have to do a huge amount with TV commentary. You can sometimes have that scenario where they'll come up to the gantry before a game, and you'll see the two commentators in vision. That does happen occasionally, and I don't mind doing it. But of all the different skills that I ran through earlier that you might, or types of broadcasting you might do, that's probably the thing I've done the least of, actually.
Oh, that's interesting, because I do find, obviously, maybe with the exception of, I think podcasts is a good tool to develop your camera presence and getting used to have a camera.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely something that's worth having, because, different TV companies will have different desires and wants from their commentators. I think if you were to look at, for example, American TV, you find the commentators are in vision an awful lot. We see it less in this country. You do see it occasionally. It's not something that's totally uncommon. And it can be down to an individual producer's style as well. An individual producer might be someone who likes to see the commentators on camera. So you've got to have that versatility to be able to. You can't be someone who says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't do in front of the camera." It's just, you have to be able to say, "Of course, yeah, no problem, I can do that." You have to always have that versatility about you.
Yeah, certainly. Insofar as the challenges that you've faced thus far in your career, I think it's always interesting to hear from people who have done well and have a presence in the space, that their journey won't be without roadblocks or things that they've come up against. Like, just interestingly, a while ago, I spoke to Everton's most successful captain, Kevin Ratcliffe, and interestingly, one of the things that stuck with me most after my conversation with him is for all the success, the stuff that he seemed to recall the most vividly is the challenges and the setbacks that he faced. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what was it like for you in terms of any challenges that you overcome? Because I know that is certainly the case for a lot of young aspiring broadcasters.
Yeah. In terms of setbacks, it's something that I would always say to any aspiring broadcaster, is that you have to develop a real strong inner belief and confidence in what you're doing, because everybody who's ever done this job has had many, many setbacks. So many emails that never got replied to, phone calls that never got answered or returned, doors that would be shut in your face, even when you think you're on the right path, you might get a setback or a rejection that you feel is unfair, that you deserve that chance and you didn't get it for whatever reason. Sometimes you have to remember that not all decisions are based purely on ability in any walk of life. Sometimes there are political factors that can come into play, and you have to be able to get past that too. It's a key part of becoming a success in an industry where there are a tiny number of jobs and a vast number of people who want to do it. You have to be able to stand out. You have to think outside the box. You have to have incredible drive and enthusiasm for what you're doing. They're all really important things. And I think if you don't have that drive and enthusiasm, you'll struggle. You have to have that drive. And those mental qualities, that mental resilience, for me, is a really important part of being a successful broadcaster with longevity.
Yes, sir.
I wouldn't sit here and pick out, one or two examples. It's a continual process. Even when you become, what you might term as an established broadcaster, you'll still have situations where you think, oh, I wanted to do that, or that didn't quite work out, or I wanted to work here, or so you're always having to overcome obstacles and rejections. And what I would say is that you also get times where people will believe in you, will give you that chance. And I think back to when I got given that chance that I told you about earlier with Tony Delahunty at Mansfield 103.2. As soon as I put the phone down after his phone call to me, my first thought was, finally, someone is giving me a chance, and I am not going to let this slip. And I've had that thought in my mind on many occasions where I've been knocking on a door for ages, and finally someone, or maybe on some occasions just to shut me up, has gone, okay, I'll give you a chance. And you think, right, well, I'll show you you're right now to give me that chance. And you have to have that kind of, that inner determination and the inner belief. I have some people might think this is a bit like corny or a bit Alan Partridge, but I have it on my wall in my house, and I do it for my kids as much as anything else, because I want to try and pass on to them when they get into the working world, whatever they choose to do.
The values.
Those type of values. And it's from Pele. And the quote is, success is no accident. It's hard work, perseverance, learning, studying, sacrifice, and most of all, a love of what you are doing or learning to do. And that really, in one quote, sums up my entire philosophy, really, about what you have to do to not just to be a success or to get a long way in broadcasting, but just in anything. I remember Stephen Gerrard saying he's somebody I admire, not just as a footballer, but as an individual as well. I've not actually met him, but I do admire him and his attitude. And I remember him saying how when he was at Melwood as a kid, he felt that in order to get where he wanted to be, despite the fact that you'd have to say he must have been one of the most gifted players at that academy at that time, his attitude was, I needed to be almost obsessed on a daily basis. It wasn't good enough to just think, oh, I'll try a leg today, but tomorrow might go a bit easy. It was everyday obsession. And I think sometimes obsession, you can take it too far. And I probably was guilty of that maybe 10 years ago, of being utterly obsessed. You could say that maybe it served me well in that it helped me get that leg up to get to the sort of level that I'm at now. But there does have to be, whether obsession is the right word, I'm not sure, but there does have to be that steely inner determination to be a success. If you want to, be in an industry like broadcasting, similar to football, in that there's so many people who want to do it, but there's so few jobs. So you have to separate yourself from everybody else, really.
Yes, sir.
Or try to.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And as far as that Pele quote, I think that's a key takeaway from this podcast as a whole. I think that was really well put. Now, just to look at wrapping this up now, Adam, I'm really grateful for your time. Looking ahead to tonight, the immovable object meets the unstoppable force. Sevilla against Jose Mourinho's Roma in the Europa League final.
Yeah,
I think you'd probably be a fool to go against Sevilla, but who are you picking?
Well, I did Sevilla's semi-final, and it just feels like, again, it's name on the trophy type stuff with them. I actually thought Juventus played really well in the second leg. One of the best performances I've seen from them in a pretty poor season from Juve. But you just always felt Sevilla would get it done. And of course, they don't lose Europa League finals. 6 out of 6 they've won. So will it be the seventh? To counteract that and to sort of back up what you were saying there, they're against Jose Mourinho, who still, I would be, if I had to pick a coach to win a one-off European game, it would still be Jose. So, it's so hard to call. I think if Roma win it, it won't be the best game to watch. I think it will be quite hard to watch probably at times. I can't see Roma going out there and going toe-to-toe with Sevilla and having an all-out slugfest. It's just not the way Jose would approach these games. But I find it really, really tough to call. I think I would just go with Sevilla. I think history counts for so much in these top-level European competitions. You see it so often in the Champions League, and I know Real Madrid ultimately lost to, in my opinion, a much better team than them this season in Man City, but so many times Real Madrid, I think nous and knowledge and just being there and having done it so many times, I think has got there. I mean, look at last season with Real Madrid. There's so many ties they shouldn't have won, but they did. And I think that a lot of the time they called on that nous and knowledge. I think it's so important in Europe, and maybe that might just give Sevilla the edge here, that having been there and done it as a club on so many occasions. But if Roma were to do it, what a story that would be, back-to-back European successes for a club that's had so little silverware over recent decades. That would be astonishing. So I'm really looking forward to it, actually. Should be good fun.
As am I. Football heritage, as a man might say.
Yeah, it's a beautiful trophy as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would call it the UEFA Cup back in the day, but I think it's one of the most aesthetically pleasing trophies out there. So yeah, I think it's a very underrated competition.
I would certainly say so. It's a joy to watch, and I think you're spot on. I've had a mate refer to it before as situational greatness, where it's in a club's history to rise to the occasion on a certain moment or in a certain competition. As we say, that might be the case for either side in this case, which I think makes for a really compelling competition.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a good watch.
Yeah, it should be. Adam, thank you so much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. Would you be up for coming on the podcast in the future? Because I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, no problem. I'm sure we can do it.
Plenty we can still talk about, mate. As I say, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
It's been a really enjoyable podcast. Take
care.
it.
No problem. All the best.